Comrades, my name is Yanis Iqbal and I am an independent researcher and writer based in Aligarh, India. While a revolution need not necessarily be violent, historical circumstances under capitalism have operated in such a way as to render violence the only viable method to overthrow the ruling class. Even after the establishment of parliamentary institutions and a democratic state, revolutionary violence has continued to act as a last resort for those who are the victims of globalization and necropolitical neoliberalism. In an 1878 article written by Karl Marx on the anti-socialist law in Germany, it is written, "An historical development can remain peaceful only so long as no forcible hindrances are placed in its path by those holding power in society at the time. The peaceful movement could become a violent one on encountering the resistance of those interested in the old state of affairs. In fact, the government tries to crush by force development which is inimical to it, although legally invulnerable." So from this text we can note that the forcible hindrances are constituted by the capitalist state, which is torn apart by the two needs to strengthen capital accumulation and maintain legitimacy in the eyes of the citizenry. The conflict between accumulation and legitimacy is balanced by using coercive power against those political forces which raise issues that cannot be structurally accommodated within the limits of capitalistic democracy that only allows for insufficient and gradual changes. When the subalterns become cognizant of this structural limitation of bourgeois democracy, they are compelled to utilize revolutionary violence to regain agency and put forth their demands in a visible manner. The application of revolutionary violence against class enemies has always been subordinate to non-violent political praxis. In the last instance, revolutionary ideology acts as the primary factor behind the overthrow of capitalism. To use the words of Fidel Castro, "Just ideas have greater power than all the reactionary forces put together. Ideas are and always will be the most important weapon of all. There is no weapon more powerful than a profound conviction and clear idea of what must be done. It is with these kinds of weapons, which do not require enormous sums of money but only the capacity to create and transmit just ideas and values, that our people will be increasingly armed. The world will be conquered by ideas, not by force." While giving a speech to the Hanover Congress of the Social Democratic Party of Germany in 1899, Rosa Luxemburg had similarly remarked that the proponents of revolution are the last to take up violent means, the last to wish a brutal, violent revolution on ourselves. Such matters do not depend on us, they depend on our opponents. Violence, therefore, has been a tactical necessity forced upon the proletariat by counter-revolutionary offensives throughout modern history. And while violence has certainly been one functional aspect of revolution, it is also a mode of struggle having ethical ramifications. That is, it is itself constitutive of the new humans that emerge from the revolutionary process. To the extent that revolutionary violence has an ethical dimension, a moral framework has been provided for its exercise. The basic structure of this moral framework can be outlined through 2 points. Firstly, revolutionary violence has been performed strictly in keeping with the moral goal of destroying capitalism and correspondingly cleansing the world of structural violence and needless deaths. This means that violence itself is ethically molded by the goal of revolution and is exercised to prevent further violence. In the concluding sentences of his essay, tactics and ethics, George Lukács had eloquently remarked, "Only he who acknowledges unflinchingly and without any reservations that murder is under no circumstances to be sanctioned can commit the murderous deed that is truly and tragically moral." From this statement, it is quite clear that revolutionary violence can be carried out only when individuals realize that the brutalization and degradation of human life under capitalism has to end. While when revolutionary violence is conceived as such, it becomes an endeavor to eliminate moral narcissism, that is, the preservation of purity of one's soul at the expense of humanity as a whole. Secondly, since revolutionary violence has been guided and regulated by the moral ideals of socialism, it also has an internal code of ethics which balances the ends, socialism, with the means, violence. The unification of means and ends has been necessary to the extent that revolutionary violence has a direct bearing on the individuals that are produced through class struggle. Furthermore, if violence is not mediated by ethical codes consonant with the goal of socialism, the process of struggle is emptied of its political meanings and the goal itself is deformed. As Herbert Marcuse once said, "No matter how rationally one may justify revolutionary means in terms of the demonstrable chance of obtaining freedom and happiness for future generations, and thereby justifying violating existing rights and liberties and life itself, there are forms of violence and suppression which no revolutionary situation can justify because they negate the very end for which the revolution is a means. Such are arbitrary violence, cruelty, and indiscriminate terror." In order to understand the historical ethical edifice of revolutionary violence, we need to differentiate between specific types of destruction. In Albert Camus' play The Just Assassins, a leading character, Dora, asserts, "Even in destruction there is a right way and a wrong way, and there are limits." The right way is constituted by prefigurative methods of violence, which act as embryonic expressions of the future. Through these prefigurative practices, a fabric of hegemony is woven, which allows the subalterns to struggle in the present and at the same time experience the socialist future. Revolution becomes an immediate index of its own truth. Ethical practices within the field of revolutionary violence comprise primarily of, first, the distinction between direct agents of class oppression and everybody else, and second, a notion of minimum force. One's weapons must be capable of stopping enemy combatants, which in the given circumstances involves killing them, but they shouldn't, beyond this, seek to accentuate suffering. Camilo Guevara, Che Guevara's son, writes that revolutionaries, even if they are being massacred sadistically, should invoke the use of force only when absolutely necessary, and even then should never accompany it with cruelty. This idea is directly proportional to the condition of being a revolutionary. When these kinds of ethical arrangements are integrated into revolutionary violence, a form of class struggle is produced which contributes towards the development of a subjectively enriching process of socialist humanization. With the exacerbation of material conditions and rising subaltern resistance, the legitimacy of bourgeois democracy is constantly coming under threat. This tense period of disequilibrium is similar to past times when revolutionary processes were carried out through the politically circumscribed use of violence. The rationale behind the tactical use of violence was explained by Marx as thus: "The governments are opposed to us. We must answer them with all the means that are at our disposal. We must declare to the governments, We will proceed against you peaceably where it is possible and by force of arms when it may be necessary. Thank you.